Northern Thailand is shaped by limestone. The hills rise gently from the plains, their surfaces covered in forest and scrub, their interiors hollowed by water over long periods of time. Rain seeps through fractures in the rock, dissolving stone grain by grain, forming tunnels that extend far beyond what is visible from the surface. Near the border with Myanmar and Laos, the Doi Nung Non mountain range stretches across Chiang Rai province. The name translates to Mountain of the Sleeping Lady, derived from the outline the hills form against the sky. At the base of these mountains lies a complex cave system known as Tham Luang Nang Non. Its entrance opens at ground level, wide and inviting during the dry season, narrowing into passages that descend gradually into darkness. The cave extends for several kilometers beneath the mountain. Some chambers are tall enough to stand in, others constrict into low, uneven tunnels. The floor alternates between dry rock and sediment shaped by past floods. Waterways run through the system, sometimes shallow, sometimes filling entire passages from wall to wall. Seasonal change governs access. During the monsoon months, rainwater funnels down from the surrounding hills and collects underground. Passages that are dry in one month can become submerged the next. Warning signs are posted near the entrance, marking the period when the cave becomes unsafe. Outside those months, the cave is treated as familiar terrain by local residents. Sound behaves differently underground. It does not travel far, and it does not echo cleanly. Light is absorbed almost immediately. A few steps from the entrance, natural illumination disappears. Movement becomes cautious and deliberate. Direction is difficult to judge without landmarks. On most days, Tham Luang remains still. Water drips. Air circulates slowly. The cave exists unchanged by those who enter and leave it, indifferent to intention or routine. At this stage, it presents no urgency, only depth and quiet. The group, later known internationally as the Wild Boars, was a local youth soccer team from northern Thailand. Their formal name, Wild Boars, reflected both regional identity and age. The players ranged from 11 to 16 years old. Most were students living in or near the town of Mae Sai, close to the Thai-Myanmar border. Their lives followed a regular pattern. School occupied most weekdays. Soccer practice took place in the late afternoon, often on uneven fields shared with other teams. Equipment was basic. Training emphasized endurance, teamwork, and familiarity with one another rather than competitive advancement. For many of the boys, the team provided structure outside of school and family obligations. The assistant coach, Ekapol Chanthawong, was in his mid-20s. He had once been a novice monk and retained habits associated with that background, including meditation and controlled breathing. His role on the team was informal but influential. He supervised practices, organized outings, and was responsible for the boys when they were away from home. The team had a history of excursions after training sessions. These trips were not unusual and were generally understood by families as extensions of practice time. The boys moved together easily, accustomed to following instructions and maintaining group cohesion. Older players assisted younger ones. Leadership within the group was fluid but accepted. Tham Luang Cave was known to them. It was not treated as a remote or dangerous location during the dry season. Local children had visited the entrance before, and some had gone short distances inside. The cave represented exploration rather than risk, shaped by familiarity and the absence of prior incidents involving the team. On June 23, 2018, after an afternoon practice, the group decided to visit the cave. The choice was casual, not framed as a challenge or test. There was no equipment beyond what they carried for the day: shoes, a flashlight or two, and minimal food. No one expected to remain inside for long. At this point, the team's identity was defined by routine rather than circumstance. They were a group of boys and a young coach moving through a familiar environment, guided by habit and trust. The cave, like the practice field, was simply another place they could enter and leave. The team entered the cave in the late afternoon. Daylight still reached the first sections of the passage, enough to move without artificial light. The air inside was cool and stable, unchanged by the weather outside. At first, the floor was dry. Footprints marked the sediment where others had walked before. As they moved deeper, natural light faded. The group relied on handheld flashlights. Progress was unhurried. There was no defined destination. They followed the main passage inward, stepping around shallow pools left by earlier water flow. The cave appeared unchanged from previous visits made by others during the dry season. Outside, rain began to fall. It was not immediately visible from within the cave. In limestone systems, rainfall does not enter gradually. It collects above ground and then moves downward through fissures, filling lower passages first. Water levels can rise quickly, without sound or warning. By the time the group turned back, water had begun to cover sections of the passage they had crossed earlier. What had been shallow pools were now connected streams. Flow increased steadily. The slope of the cave floor directed water inward toward the deeper chambers. Attempts to move against the current became difficult. Visibility dropped as sediment lifted from the floor. Flashlight beams reflected off moving water and rock, offering little sense of distance. The exit could not be seen. The sound of rain amplified underground, distorted by the confined space. The route they had used was no longer passable. The water level continued to rise, sealing the lower passage completely. Retreat was no longer an option. The only direction available was deeper into the cave, toward higher ground. This was the point at which isolation became unavoidable. There was no signal capable of leaving the cave. No one outside was aware of their exact location. The team moved forward not by choice, but by the removal of alternatives. Darkness increased as they advanced. The cave narrowed, then opened again into a higher chamber. Behind them, water continued to fill the passages. The entrance remained physically close in distance, but functionally unreachable. The team was now enclosed by stone and water, without a defined timeline or means of exit. Moving deeper into the cave was not an act of exploration but of necessity. The water behind them continued to rise, filling the lower passages they had used to enter. The group advanced toward higher ground, navigating uneven rock in near total darkness. Flashlights were used sparingly to preserve battery life. Their beams revealed only fragments of space at a time. Eventually, they reached a raised chamber several kilometers from the entrance. The ground there was dry. Water pooled below but did not yet flood the area. The ceiling rose higher than the surrounding tunnels, allowing air to circulate. This chamber would become their shelter. Once movement stopped, the environment settled into stillness. There was no natural light. Darkness was complete. Temperature inside the cave remained relatively constant, cooler than the surface but not extreme. Humidity was high. Clothing became damp, and stayed that way. Food was limited. The boys had brought small snacks from practice, intended to last only a few hours. These were rationed immediately. Portions were reduced to extend availability, though the total amount was minimal. Water was taken from the cave walls and pooled areas where it appeared to drip or collect. There was no way to know its quality, but dehydration posed the greater risk. Routine became essential. The assistant coach, Ekapal Chantawong, assumed responsibility for maintaining order. Drawing on his experience as a former novice monk, he guided the boys in controlled breathing and meditation. This was not presented as spiritual instruction, but as a method to conserve energy and reduce panic. Movement was minimized. The group remained close together to preserve warmth and orientation. Flashlights were used only when necessary. Conversation was limited. Without visual cues, voices carried differently, and sound was difficult to locate. Silence became the default condition. Days passed without external reference. There was no way to measure time accurately. Hunger intensified. Energy levels declined. Physical activity was restricted to prevent exhaustion. The boys lay or sat on the rock floor for long periods, conserving strength. Water levels fluctuated. At times, water encroached closer to the chamber. At others, it receded slightly. Each change introduced uncertainty. The cave did not offer reassurance or warning. It responded only to rainfall above, which they could neither see nor predict. Despite this, group cohesion remained intact. There were no recorded incidents of panic or conflict. Leadership was maintained through routine rather than command. The emphasis remained on patience and conservation. Survival was framed as waiting rather than acting. The darkness persisted without variation. Hunger became constant. Time blurred into a continuous present. The cave environment did not change, and the group adapted to that stability. Their survival depended not on movement or escape, but on remaining where the conditions were least immediately harmful. They waited, without knowing if anyone was searching, or how long waiting would be required. As the days continued, the effects of confinement and deprivation became more pronounced. Food had been exhausted early. What remained was water gathered from seepage along the cave walls and pooled areas on the rock floor. Intake was minimal. Hunger was constant, but dehydration posed the greater threat. Physical strength declined unevenly. The younger boys tired more quickly. Weight loss was visible. Movement slowed. Standing required effort. The cold, persistent humidity contributed to discomfort and fatigue. Clothing offered little insulation once saturated. Darkness altered perception. Without light cues, sleep patterns fractured. Rest came in short intervals, interrupted by discomfort or the sound of water moving through the cave. There was no clear distinction between day and night. Time became abstract, measured only by hunger, thirst, and brief periods of sleep. Psychological strain increased gradually. Anxiety did not manifest as panic, but as quiet withdrawal. Speech became less frequent. Energy was conserved not only physically but socially. The group remained together, but interaction diminished. The assistant coach continued to guide breathing exercises and meditation. These practices helped regulate fear and conserve oxygen in an enclosed environment. They also imposed a structure on time, offering repetition in a place without markers. This routine was critical in maintaining group discipline. Water levels outside the chamber fluctuated with rainfall above ground. At times, water rose audibly in nearby passages. At other moments, it receded enough to suggest change. These shifts could not be interpreted. They offered neither confirmation of rescue nor indication of permanent entrapment. Unknown to the group, large-scale search efforts were underway. Inside the cave, there was no evidence of this. No sound reached them. No vibration, no light. The absence of information intensified uncertainty. Survival depended on enduring conditions without feedback. Oxygen levels remained sufficient but unmeasured. Air circulation in the chamber was slow but present. This prevented immediate respiratory danger, though the risk was unknown to those inside. They could not assess whether remaining still improved or worsened their situation. Weakness increased. Standing became difficult for some. Others conserved energy by remaining prone. Despite this, cohesion held. No one attempted to move deeper alone. No one tried to force a passage through flooded tunnels. Decisions favored restraint. Waiting became the primary survival strategy. It required patience without assurance. The cave offered no indication of how long it could be endured, only that movement carried risk. Survival depended on stillness, discipline, and time passing without irreversible change. Eventually, the darkness was interrupted. On July 2, 2018, after 9 days of searching, 2 British cave divers reached the chamber where the group had taken refuge. They were Rick Stanton and John Valanthan, operating at the far limit of human endurance in flooded, zero-visibility passages. Their approach was slow and methodical, guided by fixed lines laid through submerged tunnels. The discovery was quiet. Light entered the chamber for the first time since the group had arrived. The boys were weak, but conscious. All 13 were alive. The divers relayed this information back through the cave system, triggering a shift in the operation from search to extraction. Supplying the group became the immediate priority. Food, medical supplies, and additional lighting were delivered. The boys were assessed remotely. Their physical condition varied, but all were malnourished and weakened. Movement through the flooded passages was not immediately possible. Planning the rescue took several days. The cave system remained unstable. Rain continued intermittently. Water levels fluctuated. Narrow passages required full submersion, sometimes for extended distances. The boys could not swim. Each would need to be escorted individually. During preparations, a Thai Navy SEAL diver, Saman Kunan, died after losing consciousness while transporting air tanks inside the cave. His death was not dramatic. It occurred during routine logistical work, underscoring the risks inherent in the environment. The operation continued with increased caution. Extraction began on July 8. Each boy was fitted with a full-face diving mask and sedated to prevent panic. Divers guided them through submerged sections one at a time. The process was slow. Visibility was near zero. Communication relied on touch and predetermined signals. The operation continued over 3 days. Weather conditions held. Water levels remained manageable. Each successful exit reduced risk, but did not eliminate it. The final extraction occurred on July 10, when the last boy and the coach were brought out of the cave. There was no immediate transition to normalcy. The rescue concluded not with celebration, but with exhaustion. The cave was sealed again by rain soon afterward. The mountain returned to stillness. The rescue of the Thai cave soccer team concluded with their removal from the mountain, but the event did not end at the cave entrance. What followed was a prolonged period of medical stabilization, observation, and adjustment, shaped by caution rather than relief. The boys and their coach were transported to a hospital in Chiang Rai. Initial treatment focused on dehydration, malnutrition, and infection risk. None were allowed immediate contact with family members. Their immune systems were weakened, and exposure carried danger. Recovery was managed incrementally. Food intake was carefully controlled. Physical movement was reintroduced gradually. Psychological assessment was conducted quietly and without urgency. Prolonged confinement in darkness can produce lasting effects, but early evaluations indicated that the group had maintained cognitive coherence and emotional stability. This was attributed, in part, to the discipline imposed during confinement. Meditation, stillness, and group cohesion had limited panic and reduced psychological fragmentation. Public attention intensified rapidly. Media coverage expanded beyond Thailand within hours of the rescue. The story was framed globally as extraordinary, though those closest to the operation avoided such language. Officials emphasized process rather than outcome. Divers and planners consistently described the rescue as uncertain until its completion, resistant to retrospective certainty. The cave itself was altered by the event. New warning systems were installed. Seasonal closures were more strictly enforced. The geography did not change, but human engagement with it did. What had been a familiar local site became associated with risk, planning, and international coordination. The operation involved thousands of individuals, military units, civilian divers, engineers, doctors, and volunteers from multiple countries participated. Coordination was achieved not through centralized command alone, but through shared constraints. The cave dictated the pace. Water levels determined decisions. The environment imposed limits that no amount of urgency could override. The death of Saman Kunan remained part of the record. It was acknowledged without embellishment. His role was logistical. His loss reinforced the reality that the rescue was not without cost. The event did not produce a clean narrative of success. It remained balanced by risk and consequence. In the years following, the boys returned to school and daily life under continued observation. Some pursued athletics. Others did not. Their identities were not fixed by the cave, though the association persisted externally. Efforts were made to limit long-term exposure to public attention, recognizing that survival does not require ongoing explanation. Historically, the event stands as a case study in confined survival and complex rescue. It demonstrated how patience, restraint, and procedural discipline can sustain life under extreme constraint. It also highlighted the limits of human control. The boys did not escape through effort or ingenuity alone. They survived by remaining where conditions were least immediately harmful and by waiting long enough for external intervention to become possible. The cave remains. Seasonal water still fills its passages. Darkness returns when lights are removed. The environment has not absorbed the meaning assigned to it. What occurred there exists primarily in records, in planning documents, in medical reports, and in memory. When attention faded, what remained was not a lesson, but a sequence of facts. A group entered a familiar space. Conditions changed. Survival depended on stillness, cooperation, and time. Rescue required precision rather than force. The mountain did not yield. It simply allowed passage when circumstances aligned. The event ends without conclusion. The cave continues to flood and recede. The boys grew older. The darkness underground remains unchanged, indifferent to those who passed through it and those who waited within.